say you're Durham's favorite drag queen. You're Durham's like premier drag queen. Durham's diva drag queen. I don't know. How would you introduce yourself?
Honestly, I coined the term or the phrase Durham's Drag Diva when I got started with my drag career here in Durham. And I really just like Vivica. You can call me Durham's Drag Diva. You can call me the matriarch of the House of Cox. You can call me a lot of different things as long as they're positive and affirming. That's all.
Okay, I'm there for that. Well, I love that, and so I kind of want to pick up where we left off, which was when we first met. It was last year. You were working on The Legend of Georgia McBride.
Yeah.
And you were doing the drag queen boot camp, which I was pretty much obsessed with. And my friend Natasha and we've decided we want you to put us through drag queens boot camp. So that's just going to have to happen.
I get it.
Okay, good. So post-pandemic, that's our plan.
All right, let's look to the future.
Yeah, look to the future. But right after I interviewed you, you went into school. I mean, you are a social justice activist. So this is not an unusual thing for you to speak out, and especially to be vocal about LGBTQ youth especially. And yet this thing blew up and all of a sudden you were on CNN. Like the next thing I knew, you were everywhere. So can you talk to me about that experience, kind of having that? I mean, we all know and love you here in Durham, but everybody else discovered you overnight. So how was that?
It was one of those viral moments where you recognize that you did something that you did not know was such a big deal, right? Here in Durham, we do interesting and progressive things all the time, right? And so it was no shock to us when we were asked to go into a middle school and talk about pride and liberation from the Black and queer perspective, centering trans people specifically. And when we did that, we were just like, oh, hey, having a good time in a school. And next thing we know, I'm on my way to celebrate my anniversary. And I get a phone call from my drag daughter in Nashville. Girl, you're on The View. You're on CNN. You're on today.com. And I was on all of these different things. And I was so confused as to what was happening because all I did was talk to some youth, something that should have been totally normal. And just because I'm in drag, it doesn't negate my experience advocating for LGBTQ plus rights. And it was just so weird and also fun. It was so fun. And yes, it has gotten me places. It has made room for certain opportunities, but it also came with some hate mail, which is actually what I loved. I know that when I'm fighting for my people, if I get hate mail, I'm pushing the buttons that need to be pushed because I know that I go out there with a calm demeanor and love and justice in the forefront. I don't spew any hate or vitriol towards anyone. So if anyone has a problem with me, that means they have a problem with progress. And I'm not going to stop. It only fuels my flame to spread more love and more hope and more energy into the community.
Amen to that. I love that, and I feel the same way. So I'm glad that's and so another question I have is Durham, and you and I've talked about this before, different when it comes to LGBTQ issues, drag culture, than other parts of the state and other parts of the country? Is that why this exploded so much? It didn't make news here until it made news everywhere else.
That's correct. In fact, there was a local article in the Indie Week about the importance of children being exposed to LGBTQ plus culture. And that was the same day, unrelated to going to the school. Because in Durham, it's unremarkable that LGBTQ plus folks, even those in drag, would go to school, right? Some local performers and whatnot would recognize when we all went and celebrated a young woman who was waiting to find out if she was going to get a transplant. And all she wanted to do was see some drag queens in case she died. So we showed up in droves to Duke Hospital. It is no surprise that that's what we would do in Durham and a lot of the performers in North Carolina. But yes, Durham is different. We are the L word capital of the South. We are very queer. We're very trans. We're very inclusive in everything that we do. And we are working towards social justice and equality and equity, and sometimes restorative justice when we think about what we should be doing. And it's not always about being on the stage or performing. It goes back into what drag was really about, which was creating culture and community while also lifting up those who don't have the resources. And so we're using our platform for good here in Durham. You know, the House of Cox is not the only drag in Durham. There's lots of drag here. There's the ship shows, and then there's pop-ups across the city. And I don't want folks to think that the House of Cox is the only drag. We just happen to be the drag that skyrocketed to prominence. And that doesn't change whether or not other people actually have good drag to see.
Well, and I love that Durham is progressive to the point that you're on one of the Visit Durham brochures or something like that, right? So I don't mean to embarrass you, but
You're not going to embarrass me. I was featured for Mother's Day on a postcard from Discover Durham. They did 4 postcards. 3 were beautiful landscapes across Durham. And the one said, we celebrate all mothers in Durham. And that was really touching. I'll admit it. I cried because what does that say to any other queer person who has chosen family and has created that family? It made me so happy to hear that. Yes, some of us still have families of origin, but that moment sent a message through Durham, through the state, and through the Southeast that it's okay to recognize the difference and the growth and the beauty that's in your city. So it was a really special moment, and I like to talk about it.
okay, good. So, talk to me about you are obviously ready to go for your show tonight. So, talk to me about how the House of Cox has pivoted like everybody else and embraced this virtual platform amidst this pandemic to keep the House of Cox performing and alive and going during this time.
You know, and our hope is mostly to bring joy into the homes and experiences and lives of the people who are missing out on nightlife or just humor or anything. It's a really hard time. And it's not easy to pivot. When you're used to being able to physically interact with your crowd, it's really hard to transition to looking at a computer screen and looking at a camera. Now, I happen to have had the technology and the space to make something happen for myself, but it's been a hard transition, but we're glad we did it. And we're continuously learning because we know that it's unlikely that we'll be back in a physical venue for a very long time, and we need to get used to this. And we want to hear what the community wants, but we're out here trying to do the best
we can. In the midst of this pandemic, we're hearing a lot about how one of the hardest hit communities is people of color. They've been hit hard by this. This pandemic's also, I think, revealed the extent of exclusion that our most marginalized communities experience. So, as a social activist, how has this pandemic hit the LGBTQ plus community specifically?
Well, honestly, I think it's important to disclose that I'm also the executive director of the LGBTQ Center of Durham. And I think that will provide some context on my answer. At the center, we've been working to ensure that queer and trans people of color have access to resources. To date, we've disseminated about $35,000 into the community to help people pay for rent, food, utilities, medications, any of that. We're showing up in those ways. But it's not necessarily only us who's showing up. We've had foundations show up, we have had individual giving, and that is important. People are showing up for queer and trans people of color here in this city. And we're doing this for anyone who applies. We're not limiting it to Durham. Right now, the application is down because we're realizing if we keep giving money at the rate we are, we won't actually last the duration of the pandemic the pandemic's economic effects on LGBTQ plus people. But our mission is to focus on the most marginalized of the most marginalized. So we're going to focus on queer and trans people of color who are more likely to be homeless, who are more likely to be underemployed, who are more likely to be unemployed, and who are more likely to be a part of the gig economy, meaning that they depend on their income based on showing up for contractual gigs. And that's going to be really hard during a pandemic because not everyone is maintaining their employees or their contractors, and that's hitting queer and trans people of color the hardest.
So, what is the biggest need that you're seeing that people are applying for relief for?
Everyone's applying for rent. When you have no income and the unemployment checks aren't rolling in at a rate that they should be, you've got all of these people who are going, I used to make $2,000, $1,500, $2,500 a month, and now I'm making nothing, but I still have to pay my rent. I still have to be able to eat. And the government systems, quite frankly, aren't moving fast enough to satisfy the immediate needs of folks. And so we're stepping in and we're doing the best we can.
And you were part of a Slay the Rent virtual drag show back in April to support the Rent Affordability Act, which fights for rent control in the state of California. Does a pandemic like this bring the drag community nationally together in a way that maybe is different than before? I mean, it feels different to me, but is it only because I'm seeing it online?
Well, absolutely. It's bringing the drag community closer together across the United States. And that's so magical. And it's important to me because, Stormy Day, who was in that middle school with me back in May of 2019, and I were both selected to go to Cuba for Cuba Pride, which was so exciting. And of course, that's postponed because of COVID-19. So being able to interact with drag performers from all across the US is kind of filling a little bit of that gap. And that's been nice. And Slay the Rent was so fun. Two queens from California, one from Pittsburgh, and of course myself. And that was super magical and lovely. And they wanted social justice performers. And so we were able to fight for rental affordability. But also, I'm happy to announce that I'll be performing in a 4th of July show that has representatives from all 50 states. And it's all about focusing on the experience of people of color here in the US. And Independence Day is always a really good time to have that conversation because not everyone in this country is actually as free as we pretend they are. And so all of the proceeds from that event will actually impact the lives specifically of Indigenous folks, Native Americans, or American Indians here in the US. And I'm excited about that show because it's all about telling your story. And I'm excited for what story I'll be telling, and I'm revealing no secrets. So tune in on July 4th.
And where can people see that?
So I haven't received the link yet, but it will be called Untitled America. And I think if you look up Untitled America and you pay attention in the month of June, the announcement will come out. So we're just now producing the information. So be on the lookout.
And once we hear about it, we'll get the word out to you so people can find you also through us. Now, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about drag? Because I think we know what it is because we watch RuPaul's Drag Race or we watch Pose and we're all experts, but we're really not. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions?
I think you have to take a step back and first decide whether or not there are misconceptions about drag culture in your hometown or the drag culture of the RuPaul's Drag Race queens. Mm-hmm. And I can only speak to what it's like to do drag in a town or a city. And a lot of people who have never seen a drag show before come from one of two angles. They've never been exposed to queer culture before, or they've only seen RuPaul's Drag Race. And so in the local communities, we're fighting these actually opposing stereotypes that we're scary or that we're completely available to them and that we will magically appear in beautiful costumes and that we don't need 20 to 30 minutes to put on the costumes that you see on RuPaul's Drag Race. And we just don't have time for that because we have sometimes 5, 10, 15 minutes to get changed for our next number. And so there are a lot of misconceptions about what you can pull off in a local venue versus what you see on screen. Plus, my makeup is done without a filter. And I feel very proud of that, but you're going to have filters on television because you need to optimize the appearance of the people on TV. And that's only fair to them. You want to help them grow. And I get that. But for us who are working locally, we don't have those filters to help people imagine what we might look like. We have to just do our makeup well. And I think folks who think they're going to come to a drag show and get that will be disappointed. But also for the folks who are afraid of us, I promise you we're just normal people who happen to be good at makeup and hair and costumes. Like that's essentially who we are. And you shouldn't be afraid of us. And we're not really out here doing anything bad. There are a lot of bad people in this world, and most of them are not drag queens. I'm just gonna say, most of us are not bad people.
Oh my gosh, no. And so have you found, because, once you go virtual and you start offering um, your performances virtually, and I know you've been doing this every Saturday night, has your audience expanded? Because now you're not limited to Durham anymore. Now anybody can see you anywhere.
Absolutely. We have fans all across the US because people have lived in Durham and moved away, or they have friends who live in Durham. And so the word is spreading, and that's super exciting. And we also, the House of Cox actually is not centrally or only located in Durham. We have people in Utah, New York, Baltimore, Nashville. We have people all over the US. And so sometimes this actually gives us an opportunity to reconnect with our distant because it can't be in Durham every week or every month. And that's kind of nice for us.
So tell me a little bit about the House of Cox. You are the matriarch of the House of Cox, and there's more to this than just the show that we all see. So talk to me about what the House of Cox is.
So the House of Cox is a formal drag family, which means that it is not something that you just volunteer for. You have to be adopted, right? Someone has to choose you, and you have to choose them to build a parent offspring relationship for mentorship, guidance, love, and for some people, a stable family situation so that they can fill that hole in their lives, because not every LGBTQ plus person actually has a family of origin that wants to be a part of their lives or whose lives they want to be a part of. And so we sometimes fill that gap for some of our performers. But it's family. We get together for meals, we get together for activities, we fight, but we come back together and focus on love. A member of the House of Cox recently gave birth to a baby, and we've all lost our minds. I'm pretty sure that child has the most sequins in a baby wardrobe that I've ever seen. And it just is super joyful for us to be able to do that. But also for LGBTQ plus folks, a lot of us won't actually have babies of our own. And so it allows us to form and grow a family in new and different ways. And it's really magical for us.
That's beautiful. How many people are under the House of Cox umbrella?
We have the active classification, and then we have the inactive classification. And we have about 11 or 12 active folks. And then we have a few folks who are focusing on their professional aspirations or their personal needs. And that's totally fine. But our numbers are usually around 16 or 17.
I imagine, we're all kind of quarantined in our homes right now. I've got two young people, a teenager and a 21-year-old in my house with me. But I would imagine for young people who maybe haven't come out, or who have really struggled with their own identity or coming to terms with their own identity, this quarantine time with your family could be really isolating. What are you hearing from young people in the community about their mental health, how they're doing in this weird isolation phase that we're going through right now?
Well, mental health is hard because there's still a lot of stigma around it. So we're not going to hear as much as there as exists in the world. And I want to make sure that's clear before I speak, so that it doesn't seem that I'm making generalizations when in fact we know that we don't have everyone's story, because not everyone is out or comfortable coming forward with that information. But we do know that people are feeling isolated because they're having to live a life without any influence from their LGBTQ plus peers. And so imagine you have a culture and a world that you can't touch anymore, on top of being isolated from daily life. And that's what a lot of people are going through. Now, I can't talk about mental health without talking about Project Uplift at Duke is working on having talks and support virtually during COVID. It is a program that is coming up off the ground that is specifically for LGBTQ plus young adults. We can also talk about the work at the LGBTQ Center. We have Queer Expressions, and that is put on by our Host Home program. And it's all an opportunity for young folks to engage with professionals who love them regardless of their identities on the topic of their mental health. And we're doing that work because we know the problem exists, that folks don't feel connected to their community and therefore their mental health is deteriorating.
Very important work. And we'll put the links when I post the video later. I will put the links to those resources for folks. What can the community do? Okay, so this is kind of a twofold question. The first part is, what can the community do to support our LGBTQ plus neighbors during this pandemic?
So during the pandemic, it's one of those things where if you have an LGBTQ plus neighbor, that person might be more likely to be underemployed right now. So thinking about ways to support them could include just bringing them good feelings. That could be part of it. It could be giving them money, I'll be honest, it could be. But it could also be just checking in, have the conversation, and listen for those itty bitty indicators that would tell you what's actually going on for that person. But for a lot of people, their mental health is just not going well. And that's because this sucks. It sucks so much. And I think it's okay for us all to acknowledge that no one is going to be at their best, to acknowledge that our needs are greater right now, but to also acknowledge that sometimes we have to focus, and we have to focus on ourselves. So take care of yourself first, and then reach out and offer just a little bit of support and company, because everyone feels so isolated. So find a way to distance safely, especially with your very isolated neighbors, is what I would say.
And the second part of this is, how can we as a community support those performers living gig to gig in this gig economy who are out of work right now? How can we support folks performing either under the umbrella of House of Cox or in Durham in the
I think it's important to focus on the Durham Artist Relief Fund, which is happening out of North Star Church for the Arts. And they are doing such good work. They're having fundraisers, they're raising money, but the need for this money is so great that they will not raise enough. So please continue to contribute to that. Yes, there are a lot of rapid response funds. And as the state continues to slowly open up, people will start to think life is going back to normal. That is not the case. There will still be people displaced by this work. And there are still people who will be out of work because their profession, their art form is not actually allowed anymore. Because a lot of us perform in nightclubs or at art galleries or in gyms, lots of different places, but you have to show up for them even after the state opens up.
So what is on Vivica's pandemic playlist?
That's not fair because there's so much. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and remind everyone that if I'm in my house, there is a good chance at least 3 Kelly Clarkson songs will be played every single day. That just is gonna happen. The one I was listening to today, I can't actually tell you because I'm performing it later. Oh wait, this will be edited. Ha! The one I was listening to earlier today and I'm performing later tonight is I Don't Think About You, which is by, of course, Kelly Clarkson. And then there's a queer Arab Australian musician named Wafia, I believe is how you pronounce the name. And I've been getting into that. And then there's another artist who I was just exposed to this week called Mahalia. I think it might be Mahalia, but honestly, I want to say Mahalia because Mahalia Jackson. And I just love this work, this music, because I might be very cheerful and fun to get along with, but my favorite music aches. It just aches. It has pain in it. And I think that's how I work through all of my pain is just these really achy songs. And I think these three artists are where I've been putting my energy.
So what can people, so two questions. Where can people find the House of Cox in 30 minutes when it goes live at 8 o'clock? And what can people expect from the show?
Absolutely. So this week, we are actually transitioning to a new format, and we're thinking this format might stick for a little while, where we'll do a family friendly little vignette of a show where we'll do a couple of numbers, read some, books, because who doesn't love drag queens reading to children? And then we're also going to play a little bit of a family game night, and it's like Hollywood game night. Thank you, Jane Lynch, but with drag queens, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. Once that wraps up, we'll actually go into an hour of performances that are not family friendly, so that it gives us a little bit of a little bit of flexibility in what we choose instead of having the restrictions of family friendly. And then we'll end at 10 p.m. But you can find us on thepinhook.com. We also live stream on Facebook, but Facebook is not always consistent when it comes to studio recordings of music. So the best way to catch us is actually through thepinhook.com. And if you go to that webpage, it will at 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. every Saturday.
Every Saturday night, right?
Every Saturday night, unless we get bumped for programming, which has only happened once.
And why is it important for you and for the House of Cox to do family friendly programming?
Well,
Oh,
there's several reasons, but
oh,
mostly.
I lost you for a second, but I see you now.
Okay, awesome. Um, so the reason we do family-friendly shows is actually because there's a large swath of people who want to have interactions with drag performers, but without the curse words or the sexuality, right? And those people might just not be sexual people, and they want to not be reminded that everyone's thinking of sex. It could be children and their families don't want them exposed to curse words yet, or it could just be people who want to go to bed early. So we have these earlier shows because drag doesn't just exist after 11 p.m. It's here all day, every day, and people want to engage with drag culture. So that's why we created the family-friendly shows, because it would allow us to hit a lot of people who haven't had access to our shows in the past.
And I know one of the events we had a few weeks ago, we hosted a drag queen story hour here on RDU on stage, and it was so fantastic. I know that's something you've been involved in. And it was such a successful event. My niece actually participated. She watched from Florida and she loved it. It was so much fun. So
I love that.
I think kids have much more open hearts and minds than a lot of grown-ups. We can learn a lot from children, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Children have no filter and are the purest little beings ever. And we can learn a lot from them and be less afraid of our own truths because of children. But Drag Queen Story Hour and the work that has happened around that has always inspired me. And I'm so glad. Drag queens have been around for a long time. It's just really taken off that drag queens read to children, but we've been doing this work for a long time, and it's just great to see that it's being noticed.
I love that. Well, I am going to let you go because you have a show to do, and I will be tuning in because I just can't wait. And I just long for the day when we can all be together in person and I can see the show live. But for now, I'll just watch it online like everybody else and enjoy it. It's a great way to kick off Saturday night.
Oh, absolutely. Rest along with us. Get whatever you need to enjoy the show, and we'll see you at 8.
Thank you, Vivica. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, everybody on Facebook. And tune in to the Pinhook. Give me the website again.
It's thepinhook.com.
Tune into the pinhook.com so you can see Vivica and the House of Cox performing in 24 minutes. So go get ready. Thank you so much.
You.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.